I'm on LaCroix. That's
LaCroix.
my drink of choice now.
Are you an entrepreneur, consultant, content marketer, or business professional looking to take your knowledge and skills to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Content Marketing Lounge with your host, Nathan Collier.
Oh my goodness, you guys. I have Benji Hyam on the show today. I'm really excited to share this interview with you. Real quick, if you're not yet a member of the Content Marketing Lounge, please come join us. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Content Marketing Lounge. And we are a closed group, so you'll have to request to join. But I get on, 4, 5, 6 times a day to scroll through new people who have requested to join. So if you request to join, I'll see your request within 24 hours, hopefully, and get you into the group. And you can come join us. And you can ask questions and you can interact. And it's not the kind of group where it's just a river of links to other people's content. It's the kind of group where we actually have helpful, real conversations about content marketing. Benji has been a member of the group almost since the beginning, and he's been one of those guys that's been a little bit of a hero to many people who were new and upcoming, and he's answered, I think, as many questions as I have about content marketing. So he was one of the first people I wanted to get on the show, and I'm just excited to share this interview with you. So without further ado, here's me and Benji talking about content marketing. Benji, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Benji, tell people, if they don't know who you are, tell people who you are and what you do.
I am Benji.
You're Benji?
So I run Grow and Convert. It's a content marketing agency with my partner, Davish Kanal. And then we also have a SaaS app called Wordable. There's another co-founder in that. And then previously, I ran marketing at a couple of startups in San Francisco before moving from San Diego, which is where I'm originally from, and then where I live now. Mm-hmm. And then when I was here before, I worked at a company called Vistage doing social media and content marketing, and they do mastermind groups for CEOs.
Cool. I want to hear, so just for anybody who doesn't know, like Benji is like you're like a star in the Content Marketing Lounge. You're like
in the lounge,
in the Content Marketing Lounge. Like that's where some of the people have reached out to me and they said, I don't know who Benji is, but he's awesome. So
I'm glad to hear that.
That I remember when you first started coming into the group and answering questions, I thought, I don't know who Benji is, but I got to get to know him better. And I've been lucky to be able to work with you a little bit here and there ever since. That was about a year ago, I think.
Yeah, it was, I think, what? So when did you start the group?
I started the group 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago.
Okay, I probably joined like February or March of 2016. It's been a while. I think when I joined, there were only maybe 150, 200 members.
Oh, wow. So you were in there a lot earlier than I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a really tight group almost from the beginning in that I worked really hard to get people that were talking, not just listening, talking people. So anyway, tell me how Grow and Convert like came to be. Like that's what I want to start with.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to shorten it. So okay. I had worked at this company, ThinkApps, in San Francisco, running marketing for them. And when we were surveying how to grow the company, we had done paid ads and done events and all sorts of different channels that we were testing out. Just kind of realized there was a big opportunity in content marketing because at the time, not a lot of software development companies were writing about how to build software. So educating startup founders, how to actually get products built. A lot of them were writing about really technical subjects.
Yeah.
Saw that as an opportunity. And then the short story there is grew their blog from 0 to 35,000 monthly unique visitors in 6 months. And that became the biggest channel for leads coming into the company. And then after I did that, I got poached to go work at another company running marketing there. But I kept getting asked from friends that I had working at different startups running marketing how I had grown their blog so quickly, and then how I monetized it, and then how I grew a team of writers. Like everyone had the same questions around that. A lot of operational stuff. That was what people were having trouble figuring out. And then I had met Davish at a marketing dinner in San Francisco. There were about 15 people that ran marketing at different startups. And it just so happened that Davish and I showed up, I think like 30 minutes to an hour early. And so it was just me, him, and Sujin Patel sitting at a table, just chatting, getting to know each other. And Davish had his agency. So he has another agency that's a CRO firm. And he was starting to invest in content marketing, writing his own articles. Mm-hmm. And he had been doing it, I think, for a few months. And he just said, you know what, I don't think this content marketing thing works to drive leads to my company. Like, I've been investing in it for this long. I haven't seen any deals come from it. I just don't believe that I can attract VPs of e-commerce, which is my target market, to my site and that they read. And so it ended up being this huge discussion over dinner. And at the time, I was kind of unhappy in that role that I had gotten poached for. And so I was already thinking of leaving. I think I was interviewing at the time different companies and just kind of thinking about what I was going to do next. And I don't know, somehow Davish and I just clicked. I felt like he had very complementary skill sets, really focused on the analytical and conversion side of things. Yeah. And then me on this content strategy and like building a writing team.
The CRO, just in case people don't know, that's optimization.
Yep.
That's
so he
does
doing optimization for e-commerce sites. So an e-commerce site that has 20 million to 50 million in revenue, typically retail, he's figuring out how to improve sales on their site. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, he had this challenge, and all the other people at the marketing dinner had this challenge. And I just thought, like, why not start a blog and just write about what we know on content marketing? And that's literally how it started. So it just started, I think, there was no vision for this turning into a business at the time. It just really started as a blog. I was still working full time. This was a side project. I was just kind of writing on the nights and weekends, but I felt like, well, if I can write about content marketing, educate people and help people, maybe it'll turn into something in the future. So yeah, that's literally how we got started. And then from there, about 2 months into it, I was just so fed up with the job that I had that I had booked a trip to Bali just as a 2-week vacation. Mm-hmm. And I had been interviewing at a bunch of different companies, and I interviewed at Intercom, and I interviewed for like a organic content promotion role. And what happened, I went through the whole interview process, and this was about a month after we had started the site. And they were asking for examples of content that I had promoted. And I was giving examples from ThinkApps, but then a lot of the stuff that I was talking about was from Grow and Convert. And I remember like a week later, I got a rejection letter from them. And I was like, what? There's no way that I could be denied from this role. This is literally a perfect role. And I don't feel like there's anyone that could be better at this role. And so I reached out to them and I was like, how did I not get this? And they're like, well, we really liked you, but it sounded like you were way more passionate about your site than you were about working for us.
Oh, that's interesting. So they saw something in you that you didn't even see in yourself yet.
Exactly. And so that was kind of when it clicked for me. And so after that interview, I just kind of started thinking about things differently. I was like, okay, that is true. I am really passionate about the site and educating people. So I flipped my mindset to, what if I could work on my site full-time instead? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of when everything started to fall into place. So I had already booked that trip to Bali. And then I kind of just decided, okay, well, what if I just go to Bali and just work on this full time? Can it turn into something? And then everything kind of just spiraled from there.
That's fascinating that you had it in you and you didn't. I think that's true of a lot of people, right? They have a thing that they're passionate about, and maybe other people can see it, but they can't see it in themselves.
Yeah, for me, it was really interesting because throughout my career, I guess starting out, so I started as a social media coordinator, my first job right out of college. That was 2010. So social media was a really hot topic for companies. But after working, that was my title for 2 years, but I did like social paid advertising and content marketing and other stuff within that role. And when I was kind of looking at my long-term career path, I knew I didn't want to be branded as a social media expert just because I didn't think it was going to go anywhere long-term. I just didn't really see a career path there. And so from that point, I actively started to branch out and tried to build skills in other areas. So I started going and get my AdWords certification. I started doing heavy paid advertising, landing page, CRO, SEO, just like tried to learn other areas while I was in that role at Vistage. And then I knew my next role, I wanted to go away from social media and go into just general marketing management. And so that was my path, is I wanted to broaden out, run marketing at different companies. And when I got there, I kind of just realized I didn't like every aspect of marketing. And so I think after my role at Everwise, which was that last role that I left, I realized that I wanted to go back and specialize. I felt like I got a lot of knowledge doing all these areas. I knew enough in each of them, but I wasn't going to become specialized in every single area. And I realized that I just was really passionate about content marketing. And then I had looked back on my career and had like my most success came from content marketing in every role. And so I just kind of realized that's what I'm passionate about, and it's challenging. So why not educate people how to do it better?
Right. This is how you became the king of content marketing, as you've been called.
I don't know where I've been called that, but I'll take it.
I heard it in an interview, so it must be true, right?
Maybe.
That's really fascinating because I think, so my story is I was working at a software company called Reynolds & Reynolds, and at the time I was just a writer, just a writer. Like, so I would create content and pass it off to somebody who would do, they would be the ones to put it in the email thing, and they would put it on the website. And I didn't, like, somebody showed me a string of code, and it was Greek. Like, I didn't know what a tag was. I didn't know anything at that point. And I got to this place at that company where I knew that I knew that wasn't gonna be my long-term career path. It was like this big corporate company. A lot of people politics and when's the next promotion coming along, and eventually I got this. I'm like, that's just not going to be I'm not going to go that way. And so I knew for me, eventually I was going to get to the place where I was going to take what I learned from this job and take it somewhere else, whether that was on my own or a different company. And at that point, they had nothing, they didn't have anything on me. They couldn't bribe me with promotions or anything like that. And I just decided I was going to learn as much as I could while I was there. And so I took classes on the clock about coding and learned how to do email marketing, from a technical side of things, and just got myself into all these different things that I never would have learned if I had been trying to follow the traditional career path. And I use those things every day now.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds very similar to my story. I think Vistage was that big corporate company. They'd been around since 1950s, very structured. And after that, I felt like I learned a ton from a very well-run company. And then I wanted to try going to the very opposite end of the spectrum and going into a really early company to see it grow from the ground up and get that experience.
You were employee 4, right?
Yeah, it was employee 4 at at ThinkApps, and I think employee number 24 at Everwise.
Yeah, so that's the opposite of one of those big established companies. Reynolds was 1860 or something, one of those.
Wow.
One of those kind of companies. They sold computers, but it was way back before that. They sold forms, paper forms, that eventually got transitioned into computers, and then cards. The old card computers,
Yep.
They had a history museum in there that was just fascinating to walk through. Anyway, that's really awesome. I think that's really applicable for people who are maybe sitting in a job like that, and they're wondering what's the next big thing for them. I always encourage people take the opportunities to learn as much as you can. I stayed at Reynolds for a year after I made that decision, and I just soaked up as much as I could, because that was where I could do it at that time. It was like getting paid training.
Exactly. I agree with that 100%. There's so much that you can learn on someone else's dime, so take advantage of it. Yeah. Because then when you're learning on your own dime, it's a lot harder.
Yeah. And you could also be using, like now that I work for myself, it's hard. It's like, do I spend the 2 hours doing the training thing, or do I spend the 2 hours working on this client thing that could pay me? Like, it's a lot harder to carve out training time for myself when I make those decisions. But when I was working in a company, like they encouraged everybody to do training. So it was just, all I had to do was just pick the training that I knew would benefit me in the long run.
Definitely that, and just test projects. I think at a lot of those companies, I was able to test things and just see what worked. And it was through the different testing and channels and trying new things that I was able to learn what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I've read like most of your content probably, and I've been through your training course, and I have a list of things here. It says things I learned from Benji that were awesome, and I'm just gonna read a couple of these to you. And if you would, could you just I want you to just talk more about these things, because I found them to be very helpful to me, and I know that they'll be helpful to the people listening. Mm-hmm. All right, so here we go. So there's this term you invented called Mirage content. What is that, and what's the story around it?
Yeah, a lot of our content does have a story around it. So I think this came from actually last year at this time, we were doing a workshop with a company, and I remember being in the workshop, and we had a bunch of people sitting around the table. And part of the thing that we did during the workshop was we would pull up the blog and just start looking through the blog articles that they had published recently and just critique and give feedback. And we had this aha moment during the session, along with everyone sitting in the room, where we pulled open their blog. And I remember David saying, or I think we were doing the research prior, but I remember there being this back and forth between me and Davish where he was like, you know what? I don't know if they can improve their content, because when we were looking at the titles, all of them looked really good. Mm-hmm. And we thought all of the articles were going to be really great and on topic. And then I remember clicking into the article and reading it, and I was like, this is horrible. It's not good. It does look good. And it's on topic, and the headline's good and it's catchy, but then you click in and it's just, the article doesn't add any value. And then I remember sending him a bunch and showing him what I meant, and he was like, yeah, you're right. And then when we were in the workshop and doing this exercise live, we opened an article and we had the target audience in the room, and then we asked the target audience, hey, is this actually valuable to you in any way? And they all said no. Yeah. So that was where the concept came from. And then the more and more workshops we did, we kept seeing the same problem coming up over and over again. And so we just decided to brand the term Mirage content, because it wasn't clickbait. I don't even think it was intentional. And so it's not like people were just creating these catchy headlines just for clicks. People were creating content that they thought was valuable, but that truly wasn't. And it was mainly because they didn't have subject matter expertise in the topic that they needed to write about.
Right. And the person who was writing it didn't really know the subject.
Yeah. So I think what happened is, let's say 2010, you have this emergence of content marketing becoming mainstream and companies starting to invest a lot in it. And then I think like 2013, 14, like almost every company starts to realize that they need to start investing in here. So you have just a flood of content coming on. And I think what worked in 2010, where you only had a few companies doing this, you could pretty much produce anything and start getting results from it, just because there were a lot of competitors. And then you have this flood of content come on, and then content marketing becomes harder. And I think people just didn't adapt their strategies from over the last 7 years. So people kept doing the same exact thing. And I think nowadays it's very difficult to stand out amongst your competition and to get results from content marketing, because there's so much content out there. That's kind of what we're training people, is just newer strategies to do this that we think work.
Yeah. So a couple of things from my experience on this topic is that so as a guy who's done a lot of freelance writing, I'll occasionally get clients who they come to me and they say, "Hey, we want an article a week on the topic of, I don't know what it is. Call it CRM, right? Can you do that for us?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I can do that for you. Like what kind of resources do you have? Like, who are your subject matter experts? Like, who is the audience?" And they're like, "No. We just want one article a week on CRM."
It's so typical.
and I'm like, okay, no. No, yeah. The answer is no, I can't do this for you, because what's happening behind that most of the time, at least in my experience, is that somebody told them they have to publish once a week. They have a list of keywords and they think, okay, I got to put the keyword in the title and the first paragraph and the URL, and then I'm good, right? That's all I need to do.
Yeah.
And what happens in that situation is that they hire a writer, usually for like a low cost. The writer spends 15 to 20 minutes Googling that topic, and you can find 7 other articles about it, right? And they're all list posts. Yep. And so then you just you cobble together your own article by pulling bits and pieces from these other articles. And it's this sort of semi-plagiarized mess of non-helpful content that everybody is rewriting of each other's stuff.
And then that happens so many times that half the information isn't true by the
exactly.
5th time it's been written.
Exactly. And on top of that, even if it was true, like it's so high level that anybody who was reading it, who was actually in the work, like somebody who's an expert doing the work every day, who might come across that article, like to them, it's not news. It's like me telling you, like, "Hey, Benji, you need to write stuff that people like to read."
Yeah.
It's like, that, like you're way past that, so
I think part of that challenge, like, it's tough because I don't necessarily blame the content marketer. Mm-hmm. I think they just don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a big reason why we started the site, was to educate people about a good way to do this and a bad way to do this. Because when I first started, that was what I was doing. I was sending a topic to writer. It was probably more specific than that. But I would send over a topic and I'd say, "Go write an article about this." And then the article would come back and it'd be horrible. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't get it. Why can't the writer write on this topic? Then I just had this realization that, well, I didn't give the person direction. Like, I have a thought in my mind about what I want in this article. Mm-hmm. And if I don't convey that to the writer, how are they ever going to come back with an article that's good and what I had originally intended?
Right.
And so then I started outlining the article or getting on the phone with the writer and really describing what I wanted. And then that started to help and improve the process. And then, things evolve over time. Yeah.
So the solution to Mirage content is this other thing that you've talked about. You call it specificity.
Yeah.
So talk more about that.
Yeah. So specificity strategy, I think Davish coined this one. I think I wrote the post, but Davish is the one who came up with this concept. His background, he's taken debate classes a lot. I think
so. Having been on the phone with him, listening to him interview a couple of people, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, so he's really good at it. So he's basically trained to find a compelling argument.
Yeah,
and
that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's the story behind the scenes on that. But what we realized when we started reading a lot of blog posts was just there were too many concepts trying to be brought into an article. So like the article would be all over the place. Like the intro would be on something, and then there'd be all these different points that didn't really tie together. And the article wasn't that compelling. And again, I think this problem stems from there being so much content out there that all the stories just sound generic. It's like the growth story behind this company, or I don't know how this person did this, and there's no central theme in each of the stories. Mm-hmm. And so part of the specificity strategy is breaking down that high level theme to something very specific. So instead of, let's say, an article on growing traffic, it's how this company grew traffic from X to Y using this one specific technique. That from a reader's perspective, it's not just some general article about growing traffic. Then it's, oh, I can implement this one technique, or I can learn from this one technique that this company did to grow their traffic from X to Y. And it's more compelling to the reader. And I think the reader gets more out of it.
Yeah, I think it's more executable too, because you've given them something that they can take and do like today, rather than like this big, huge mess of stuff that maybe they will or maybe won't even get all the way through.
Definitely. It's more executable on both sides. So I think it's more executable to create, because have you ever, as a writer, I'm sure you've sat down a bunch of times and just like, I don't even know where to start with this.
Oh, totally.
Because there's so many different ways that I can go with this.
Yep.
And so having that central theme helps you focus exactly what you need to write about. So yeah, if you're talking about how to grow website traffic, like where do you even start with that topic? There's so many different directions you can go. But then when you narrow it down to a specific way that you grew traffic, it becomes super simple to start writing. And so I think it helps on both sides. I think it helps from the reader get something more valuable out of the article. And I think it helps the writer really have clarity around what they need to write about and what all the points need to be in the article to make that compelling point.
Yeah. From the writer's perspective, to me, if I sit down and I have that feeling, that's a sign to me that I haven't done my prep work. I haven't done the work to outline the thing. And usually if I have that feeling, it's because I'm tackling an issue that's way too big, like way too big. And like you talked about that one, how to grow website traffic. I mean, you could blog about that every day for a year.
A whole blog could be that topic.
That could be your whole thing. Yeah.
Or,
so to try and capture all that in a 1,500 word blog post you're just never going to be able to get detailed enough or specific. There you go. Specific enough to give anybody any sort of real value. At least not anybody who's actually in it. You know what I mean? Like anything you're going to be able to talk about in one article at that level it's just going to be high level, and they're not going to be able to take anything from it that is valuable.
Yeah, so I think that's what happened. So everyone started creating the ultimate guide this, the ultimate guide that, and the ultimate guide would be like 1,000 words or 1,500 words. I mean, if you're really teaching someone a subject, there's no way that you're going to be able to do that in 1,000, 1,500 words. So,
right.
Yeah.
I can teach you my proofreading process in that amount of time, because it's one small little thing. But I can't teach you like how to write a good article. Like,
no,
there's just no way.
No way.
So the other classic mistake, there's that one, and then the other classic mistake that software companies make, I think, more than anybody else, is they just write about what they know.
Yes.
So it's the coding company who does a CRM product that's writing about coding instead of about sales. So
that's probably the most common issue that we run into, and every single company we've talked to or worked with has the problem where the topics that they're writing about are kind of closely related to what they do. So if they sell sales software, they might talk generally about sales, but they're not talking about specific pain points that are interesting to their customer or that help solve a problem for their customer. And so, I think that's solved by our user research process, and just really, so at the beginning of an engagement, going into the company, hearing about ways that different customers use the product, some of the challenges that they had before using the product or service, and then how they overcame those challenges. So a lot of the user research process is done qualitatively. It's hearing stories, listening to stories about customers, talking to customers themselves, and hearing challenges that they faced, and then coupling that with doing some other research on the industry, whether it's in Google, whether it's looking in forums to see if other people have these same challenges, and then what can we write about to solve those.
When we're skipping down a couple on here, but talk to me more about audience research. There's this thing you talk about finding the best customers that I think is really valuable.
Yeah. So the best customer, I guess the concept came from a lot of people are just using these broad personas to attract people. But I think the persona model sometimes is based on the wrong thing. It's based off like this person who's 24 to 35 years old who it's like all demographic information.
I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday. It's Marketing Mary from
I mean, you're typecasting basically your audience, and it doesn't really make sense, and it's hard for you to get specific about the content you're going to write if you're just generally aiming at some person that's a male or female in their 20s and who likes baseball or something like that. I don't know. That's kind of what the personas have historically been. So our process, the best customer, is meant to uncover, like, oftentimes companies have hundreds of customers, and some of the customers are really good. So they were easy to close. They pay like what the product or service is worth instead of like asking for discounts or stuff like that. They stay on a long time as a customer, so they really see a value in the product or service, and they don't take up a ton of company time in customer support, asking questions, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So you've got like high value for the customer and low maintenance, basically across the board.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to find. Who is that customer, and what's the difference between them versus everyone else? We don't want to go attract customers who are going to take a year to close, and you're going to have to convince them to buy your product, and then they're only going to churn after that. A lot of companies do go after those people just because they want the money, but they're the sweet spot of the person who's a perfect fit for the company. So like, what is that product market fit, and how can we go find more of those people who are best for you? So part of the process is going through the quantitative side. So looking in the company's CRM database, looking at their customer base, trying to identify the companies that are of these qualities, and then asking ourselves, what are the commonalities between these companies? Do they all come from a certain industry? Do they all have the same type of buyer? Do they all have the same type of challenges that they're facing, and this product or service solves those directly? And so step one is just figuring out who those companies are and what the traits are that make those companies similar. And then the second part of that is learning everything that we can about those companies. So what are the challenges that they face? Like just all open-ended questions, stories about how they've used the product, who they interact with inside of the company, like who are the other decision makers, so that we can just get a really good sense for who that customer is and why they even care about the product or service. And then typically all the ideas for content come out of that second part of the exercise, where we can figure out what interests them, what they'd be compelled to read, what challenges they're having, and then we can go create content that maps to those things for the customer.
Yeah. So just to give an example, I listened to you to interview a guy from a sales organization earlier this week, and he was talking about how in his company they've gone from kind of targeting everybody to being a lot more strategic about who they target. So they want bigger companies, bigger deals, and so for them, like, they sell a product that is for salespeople. And one of the things I heard him say that stood out to me was, he said, we might look at a 500 person company, like that might be a good target for us, but take one company that has a 500 person, 500 employees, and take another company that has 100 employees, and look at them side by side, and you think that the 500 person company is a better match. But for us, like, what if that 500 person company has 20 salespeople, and the 100 person company has like 50 salespeople? Like, down to that level, like the 100 person company is a better match for them, because that's where their licenses are, and that's where the number of seats that they're going to sell is going to be. Like, so that's a bigger opportunity for them by a factor of 2.5. So if you're only looking at like the size of the company, that's not detailed enough to really get all the way down. And I like how you guys do that. You get way down into like, okay, what are the characteristics that really do make, for our best customers, and that was I thought was a good example of how that works, at least in real life.
Definitely. I mean, the whole process came from my experience working in San Francisco, because I think what I saw, not only in the companies that I worked at, but just talking to people, going to interview at different companies and hearing how they operated and worked, was that a lot of companies weren't that targeted in who they were marketing to, and that led to like in the beginning it may work, just casting a wide net, but then you run out of channels and you run out of ways to get in front of the right people. And then sales starts complaining about delivering bad leads to the company. They're not qualified. And so to solve this, marketing really has to step up and figure out who the right person to target is. And so this is the same thing that you would do in a venture-backed startup or to achieve product market fit. You have to do all this customer research. That's at the beginning of the process. Most people just jump into, let's just test Facebook advertising, or let's just test a channel. And they don't talk to real people who would need the product or service first to learn about them, to get a better understanding about them. I think all the good ideas, whether it's in content marketing or any other marketing channel, come from the real people who would use the product. Once you learn about them and get an understanding of their wants, their needs, their challenges, what holds them back from achieving success in their role or generally, that's where you get ideas about, well, what channels do I need to target to get in front of them? What's the right messaging that will hook them? Like, what's the value proposition that we need to create that will be interesting to them? It's all these same things. And so when we thought about content marketing, it's the same framework. It's just now applied to content. It's the same thing. You still need to learn about your customers and learn everything about them to be able to write content that will be compelling to them in some way.
Yeah, and it's not good enough to just go talk to your salespeople, because then you're just going to get a colored version of it.
Exactly. You need to talk to the people directly.
Yeah.
Because the salespeople, they're just going to talk about generalities. They're not going to talk about things in their own customers' words. And I think even from a messaging standpoint, I mean, I know you do copywriting and stuff like that too. Being able to put something in the exact phrasing that someone would say it in the context of their own role or their job or whatever it may be is really important in building that connection with them.
Yeah, it's powerful. That's when I sit down to write content. So personas, right? So there's that, the persona, that's the thing that's taped to the wall of, the marketing department, right? It's marketing Mary and salesperson Steve and all this kind of stuff. And so if I go into a company and I'm working with them, if they don't even have those, like, I'd rather them have those than nothing. But what I do is I'll take those and I'll just kind of on my own, I'll go out and do research, and I'll find somebody who looks a lot like marketing Mary. Because then I have like a person, like I have a real human person that I can look at and think about. And so when I sit down to type, I can type to like somebody who's real, like an actual human being. And so for me, like when you talk about specificity, like that's how I think about creating content. I'm not standing on a stage broadcasting to a giant group of faceless people. Like, I try and write my content to one person.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You should always have that person in mind of who you're writing to.
Stephen King, by the way, and I said this last night in another interview I was doing, wrote all of his novels to his wife.
Really? I didn't even know that.
Every single one.
That's fascinating.
So lots of writers have one person that they write. That's just their audience of one. And I mean, how many people have read Stephen King's books? So
a lot.
And they feel like they're written just for you, and that's why. Okay. Oh, you've already done some of these. So I wrote here, you go into a new company, they're interested in generating leads from content marketing. Like, where do you even start?
Good question. Is the company established or brand new?
Let's say they are a small company. They are a couple years old, and they've been doing some content, but it's not working.
Yeah, I'll give a couple of scenarios. So I think, like the ThinkApp scenario, going into a very small company, I think the benefit that they had that helped me was just having past customers that I could talk to. So first step that I did there was I reached out to people who we had previously done projects with and asked to either have a call or meet them in person. And I remember there was one guy who I'd spoken to, and I took him out for a beer. And I just started asking why he was developing this app. And he told me this whole story about how he transitioned from a dentist to he'd always had this idea in the back of his mind since he was like 18. He had written out everything that he wanted the app to do, and he had tried to build this multiple times with other companies, and he had spent $60,000 or $80,000 on development and just never saw a real product come to life. And he doesn't trust developers anymore, and he's had just really negative experiences. And so then I asked him, like, what changed when working with ThinkApps? And he said, well, like, I trust the founders. They were always communicative. They took on the risk for the project. And all of a sudden, like, all these ahas started coming out of this conversation. So what's the challenges with other companies that in the software development space? Poor communication, poor quality, not sure if they're ever going to deliver a project on time. And there were no ways to, for any of the companies to show this. And so even building into the product and the value proposition, we tried to make this prominent, because the more and more common conversations that I had with customers, these were very common themes that almost every single person that had worked with us had faced previously. Unfinished projects that they'd spent thousands of dollars on, could never use, a developer that went dark, messy code that someone ended up having to rebuild over and over again. Yeah. So from a marketing perspective, that's what we try to educate our customers about, these challenges and how we were solving them. And so, again, I think the first thing that anyone needs to do, whether it's a small company or an established company, is just have those conversations. I don't think there's anything that's more important than that. If you're at a company that doesn't have customers, you need to create a hypothesis about who the target customer is and go like do cold outreach, right, or go ask for 30 minutes to an hour of this person's time and just get to know them and what challenges they face, and ask them about competitors in the market, what's wrong with them, what needs do they feel like aren't fulfilled yet, and just do that customer research, even though they're not your customer. Just think of them as a customer that you're going to target.
Right, because those are the same kind of people. They're going to have the same issues.
Exactly. So that's always step one. From there, you'll realize these common themes or these stumbling blocks that people are having at various points in the sales process. So what is the first thing that someone thinks about compared to what are the things that someone thinks about when they're close to purchasing, and then trying to write around topics at all of those different stages along the funnel.
Okay, I have to stop you because this is important on this key thing. One is that everybody is scared to make the phone call.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Like people in marketing are like, well, wait, you want me to actually talk to people outside the building?
Yeah, that's true.
And so what do you say to them?
It's just something you have to do. I don't know. For me, I am a huge extrovert and I like talking to people on the phone, so I don't mind it. But yeah, there are a lot of people who would just never do this or are afraid of reaching out to someone. I think you'll be surprised how many people are open to talking if you just do the outreach. Even for me, I remember when we first started our site, I would reach out and share stories with people, or I would reach out to interview someone at a large company when no one, like when we first got started, when we didn't really have a site, or even at ThinkApps, I reached out to people like Chris Messina, who's the one who invented the hashtag, and just pitched him on an article. And he wrote we did 2 interviews with him. And it's just surprising how many people are open to talking. I think the thing that holds most people back is that they just don't ask.
Yeah, they think that well, I can't ask because I'm not big enough, because they won't say yes, because I'm nobody, whatever.
Yeah, so I think to get around that, you just got to think of what's the value to the person. Every company or every person has some value that they can add to someone else. So things that I've done to land interviews or talk to people, say you can send them something as a thank you. I've done that. So just sending like a Starbucks gift certificate. I have, I don't really do that anymore, but I just, so now with different blogs, I think you can leverage your traffic. So if you have 10,000 visitors and they have the same audience as you, you can say that they're going to be able to get exposure to an audience that they haven't been able to get in front of. That's within their target audience.
That's huge.
That's huge. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we use for anyone that we reach out to. What other things have I done? Giving them access to something that they don't have. Making a connection to someone that they don't have access to. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can convince someone. I think the key is knowing what motivates the person. So a lot of people don't do enough research before they reach out to someone. And so I'll look at their LinkedIn profile, maybe read some articles that they've read, look at their Twitter stream and see what they care about or what they're writing about that's important to them. And then just try to craft a pitch that just shows them that I've done my research. And oftentimes that's enough. Where it's not some generic pitch that's been mass emailed. When they can see that you took time to write a personal email, almost always they're willing to respond.
Yeah, I'm sure you've gotten pitched on stuff too. I mean, heck, I pitched you on this, but I get pitched all the time. Yeah, I get pitched all the time too, and I can immediately tell when somebody's sending me a copy and paste.
I agree. So if anyone's taken time to do homework, I usually will talk to them.
Yeah, and I think I've never had anybody really say no, as long as it's just. The other thing is that people like it. People like to be asked questions about things that they know a lot about. Like that's something that people like to do. And I think people underestimate the power of that.
Yeah. For most people, like play into their ego. Everyone wants to be featured in something. Everyone wants to be talked about, especially as you go up the ladder to CEO or someone like that. They love getting exposure. They love sharing stories about things that they've done well. So play into that.
Oh gosh, there's so many here that I'm not. Okay, can we do a lightning round? Because we're getting toward the end. Okay, so you've hired a bunch of writers.
Yes.
There will be a lot of writers who will listen to this. Yes. How does a writer listening to this get hired by somebody like you?
Man, that's a good question. I wish I could give a perfect answer because I would love to bring on amazing writers.
All the time?
Yeah, so I have had a lot of learnings throughout the years about this. I'm just trying to think of like what would be good tactical advice. I think the big thing for a writer is just knowing what the company expects or what the person leading content expects, and then being able to write as closely to that as possible. So what I would do if I was a writer, take a look at all of the stuff that's been published on the blog and what style of writing it is. Like the format, it typically, even on our site, it's very similar formats for every single article. The intro has to be really strong. It can't be generic. It can't be high level. There's got to be tactical advice and takeaways in it, using real examples and just showing that you can pull subject matter expertise into an article, even if you don't have it. So if you've done research, if you need to go talk to a source or multiple sources to be able to understand the mindset of the person reading it and get the information needed into the article. I think that's the most important thing. And that's the reason why we don't accept most writers, is because they try to write something that they don't know anything about. And then it just ends up sounding like fluff. Like even if I don't know anything about the topic, I can usually tell quickly if the person has knowledge or can write based on how compelling the article is to someone else. So I think even before you go send it off to someone, send it to 3 friends or 5 people and ask them for feedback on the article and ask them maybe what the point of the article was and if the point came across.
Yeah. I think we can, I want to be cautious.
You probably have better answers on this than I do.
I'll give you some tips that I use. I think I want to caution people. I'm going to give it an answer and then a disclaimer, or at least a strategy that I use. One is the Mirage content. I used to call it fluff content. Now I just call it Mirage content because I think that's a better term. It's usually that process that we talked about before, which is you Googled stuff and then you kind of rewrote it. That's how most people kind of try and write to a subject. And I just go back to your college days, pretend you're doing a research paper, or read the New York Times. The New York Times is a
that's the level of quality we're always shooting for. That's the benchmark.
Yeah. So do it how they do it, which is, you've got a reporter there. The reporter's not an expert in, astrophysics, but he went and he interviewed an astrophysicist, and then he wrote an article about it. So,
exactly. That's the key.
So the sources don't present yourself as something that you're not. Like, you don't, because it doesn't work, and two, because you don't have to. So you can do subject matter experts, which is actually like getting people on the phone and calling them, and then like read a book and reference page 54.
Yes.
And even better if you're always reading and you have kind of you have 100 books that you can just kind of quote from. Like, you may not know exactly where it was, but you kind of have a sense of, I remember this book talked about that thing and I can go find it. That gives you tons of credibility, or at least in it has given me tons of credibility when I've turned in, initial projects to people like you.
Agreed. Yeah. If you're writing about a specific industry, like, do your homework on the industry or start getting an interest in it and learning about it. I knew nothing about software development, but I started reading about it and interacting with people who were in it and asking questions. And over time, you learn like the ins and outs of it. And I think that's what's important for a writer too, is to take that same mentality. They're not just a writer. They need to also gain domain expertise to keep honing their craft and getting better.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is, so that's the one thing is don't present yourself as an expert. Just treat it like a journalism project, and quote the experts, because that's what gives your piece credibility. If you really want to blow somebody away, call an expert and have quotes from an expert that you did without being told to do that.
Yes.
In your piece, and turn it in, and you'll get how many people did that with you when they were trying to get a job?
Almost none.
Almost none, right? Yeah. So if you want to differentiate yourself, do that, and I promise you'll get a good response. The other thing is the style. Like, the style is really tricky and important. I know some of the pieces that we've done, when we talked before, we've talked about like there's a difference between like the New Yorker
mm-hmm, yes.
or New York Magazine. And we kind of talked about that. But really, like, when you're talking about internet articles, something that I've sort of come to understand even more, even in just the last couple of weeks, is that you need to treat it more like a newspaper article rather than a magazine article.
Yeah.
With a magazine, think about a print magazine. Like, you open up the magazine and it's the pictures and you know what I mean? Like, you're kind of there.
It's very visual.
You're just going to read it, and that's what keeps you on the page. That's what keeps you reading it. And so you don't have to, a lot of times magazine articles have kind of slow leads or delayed leads, and they kind of tell a little story, and then eventually they kind of get into the point of the story. And
this is a good point.
You cannot do that in a New York Times article.
Start with the lead.
Yeah. Do the lead.
And then tell the backstory.
Tell the backstory at the bottom. And I'm just coming to the point where I'm starting to understand how that works in marketing better than I did before, because I was a journalist, right? So
people have short attention spans. That's what it is. There's so much content. So if you don't capture someone's attention in the first in the intro,
you're done. They're done.
To make them want to read, they're off the page. And so now I think so many people wanted to bury the key advice to down somewhere deep into the article or towards the end. It's lead with it and then explain it in more detail below. Yeah. And that way you hook someone at the very beginning. They know what they're getting into. They know what they're going to get from the article. They want to keep reading, and then explain everything down below. And I think that's the key.
Yeah. So there's two ways to do that. One is with a straight lead, a straight journalism lead, which is like put as much as you can into the first 30 words. Give them as much value as you can in the first 2 sentences. And then the other way is a cliffhanger, which is to say, when you read this article, you're going to get these 3 things.
Yep.
And then you deliver on it. So don't do New Yorker, do New York Times. So there we go. I got off on a tangent, but there we go. Okay. Oh geez, I can't ask all these questions. Top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. People don't understand this. There's 2 different kinds of, there's content you can do for top of the funnel and content you can do at bottom of the funnel, and they're different.
Yeah. Top of the funnel relates to a broader audience. So like, you're trying to attract anyone that could potentially be in your segment. So an example would just be like an article that features 20 different marketers, because you're trying to attract marketers back to your website. versus bottom of the funnel is talking about a very specific problem that they have that relates directly to the product or service.
Right.
So 2 examples that I'll give from previous. So ThinkApp's top of the funnel was an article that talked about someone just building a product, a really interesting story. So it related to the company because it was about someone who built software. And so anyone who's interested in building software would generally be interested in this, and it has a lot broader of a reach. Whereas a bottom of the funnel was something as specific as like, which platform do I build on first, iOS or Android? Mm-hmm. Very specific problem that you would only have if you were looking to build an app for yourself.
Right. If you think about like where people are in their thought process and the buying process, like for somebody who's just a story of how they did it, anybody could read that. But somebody they're ready to build, one of the last questions they're going to ask is, okay, which one do I do first?
Yeah. So the story someone might be looking for inspiration, and that's the reason they're reading this. So really early on doing research, whereas, very close to the buying process on the latter one.
I like the Soul, the Reddit piece too, as another example of top of the funnel.
The one, which one?
Soul Orwell.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that has nothing to do with content marketing really, but it's just an interesting story that we wanted to tell.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to marketers.
Yes.
I'll link to that in the show notes. All right. One other question, 2 more actually.
Okay.
How important is SEO? I know, like
answer
that in 2 minutes, right?
All right. I don't know where to start with this question. Okay, so we take the approach of pain point first, optimize for SEO later. Mm-hmm. Here's why. Last week, I did consulting with someone who is an SEO person, and they got this project delivered to them by the company that they're consulting for, and they asked them just to rank for 5 different head keywords. Ranking for 5 different head keywords, not driving any conversions. Why? Because the head keywords, you can't figure out what the person actually wants from this topic and if it's going to lead to purchase intent. So I think SEO is good for driving a lot of traffic. It's not always best for driving sales or conversions because I don't think that you can understand exactly what the searcher's intent is if you're going after those head keywords versus our approach is going after long tail keywords. So if you think of how someone searches in Google, most people aren't just searching for marketing help and then randomly finding some agency that they want to work with. They're searching for a very specific problem that they have. I'm having, like, how do I grow my website from 10,000 to 100,000 visitors? And then they come across this article explaining how someone's done that. And they're like, oh, wow, this person can actually help me do this for myself. That's more purchase intent driven. Or I need a marketing agency in San Diego. That's more purchase intent driven versus just marketing agency. So that's how we just think is what are the challenges that people would be searching for in Google that would lead them to find our solution, and then writing content there versus let's just rank for the highest traffic keywords in my industry. And by getting 100,000 visitors to our site, magically, like 0.5% or 1% will convert to a customer.
Right. I feel like SEO agencies, they live on the metric of traffic.
Yeah, and it's good. Traffic's important, but if the traffic's not doing anything for you, then it doesn't really matter. And I think that was, historically, I think that was the approach. Just get a bunch of traffic to your site, and some of those people will just magically fall into customers, or you get brand awareness, all that kind of stuff. Now I think it's a little bit more challenging, and I think people's search behavior has changed in the last 10 years. And so I think you need to adapt the approach to just how people search. If someone has a problem, they're typically writing a full question into Google. They're not putting like a couple words. And so what are those questions that your customers have that you can solve for them?
Mm-hmm. And that you have also said in other interviews that you do content first and then SEO second, which is you think about answering the questions, and all of that comes from audience research. It's not coming from a list of keywords.
Yeah, correct. So we do research on sites like Quora, see what are the top questions that people are asking that are getting high traffic. We get questions from the customers. What are the questions that they had pre-purchase, post-purchase? What were the pains that they were facing in their company that they would have gone online to search for help on? That's like where these questions are coming from. And then we use Google suggested search to figure out what's the exact phrasing that someone, or what's the most common phrasing that someone types into Google,
right,
and then map the whole article around that topic.
Yeah, I've done a thing where I've gone into the Quora, Reddit, Facebook groups, and I just like copy and paste questions that I find people asking there into a spreadsheet, and you do five forums or Reddit subreddits, or like you can really quickly compile 100 questions that are being asked by real people in your market. And that's 100 content ideas. So
love it. Yeah, I would recommend that all day.
Cool. All right. I have one last question. It's from Sandy, and it's Coke or Pepsi?
Coke. Easy.
Easy.
Yeah. Pepsi, I don't even know why they're still a company.
I'm getting old. I had to go from regular Pepsi, which is what my family had growing up, to diet because I was getting fat. And now I can't even hardly drink the diet stuff just because.
I'm on LaCroix. That's
LaCroix.
My drink of choice now.
Yeah, I live in Ohio. LaCroix's it hasn't really caught on out here yet.
It'll once it does, it'll take over.
I've heard. I've seen all the pictures of you guys in all the meetings out there with the LaCroix. So very cool.
It's the new startup drink.
What's something else? Is there anything else that you want to say to the members of the Content Marketing Lounge? You first, let me say thank you for all of the value that you've provided in that group. I'll send a note to you afterwards, but I have a couple of people who have specifically said to me that your answers to some of their questions have been like business changing kind of things.
Good.
So for on behalf of everyone in the group, let me say thanks for all the value that you've given over the last year and a half. What's something that you could say as sort of a final thought to anybody who wants to advance their content marketing career?
Yeah, I think take everything with a grain of salt. Everything that you read online is what worked for someone else. Mm-hmm. And what you should take from it is the ideas and the thinking behind why it worked or why it didn't work. And don't try to copy exactly what someone else did, because a lot of times it will lead to unsuccessful outcomes. Like everything that you read, just try to put yourself in the shoes of the person who wrote it and think, why did this work? And how could I apply a similar concept to my company? Because every single company is going to be different. They operate differently. They have different business models. And so, you need to test a variation of the strategy given on your own company and then assess and tweak from there. And I think that's probably the best advice that I can give. There's tons of articles about how someone did something amazing, and you're never going to be able to copy exactly the way that someone did that. So, I think it's just important to take a step back and try to understand, why it worked, and then try to replicate its success in the context of your own business.
Yeah, because what'll happen is you'll see how it's different when you actually try it.
Yeah. And things are constantly changing. I mean, the internet's changing, strategies are changing, channels are changing, the way consumers behave change all the time. And so even something that worked 6 months ago or a year ago doesn't work anymore. And so you always have to be trying new things and just iterating on the things that you're trying. That's
so true. I mean, so many of the content marketing books are based on strategies from 2012 when you could keyword stuff your way to glory.
Exactly. It's challenging. It's tough. That's why I like marketing. It's always new. It's always changing. And so you're always forcing yourself to have to be in the weeds. If you're not in the weeds anymore, you're going to become outdated super quickly because you don't have a pulse on what's going on and what's changing.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I love that. We'll end with that. Thanks, Benji.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Content Marketing Lounge. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit contentmarketinglounge.com or on facebook.com/groups/Content Marketing Lounge. We'll catch you next time.